Good morning, Grace Baptist. It's so good to be with you guys in this way this morning. I'm back with you after enjoying a bit of leave.
Good morning to you too from me. It's a beautiful day and I look forward to seeing you again someday, but in the time being, we are grateful for this platform that we can interact with you on. So today it's a very topical question because it has dominated the news and social media in the last 2 weeks, following the very brutal rape and murder of a young teenage girl. And this is the problem of gender-based violence. So the question that comes to us is, have we dealt with this in our church? And have we had a forum for men to discuss the issue of gender-based violence? And sadly, we have not really addressed this problem in our church at all. But we do need to discuss the issue of gender-based violence and what a biblical perspective would be. So John, I want to ask you, what do you believe God's answer is to this problem? And what is the problem so bad, actually?
Good question. I'm going to first start off by saying that I feel, and I'm sure the both of us do, immensely disqualified to answer this question, being
Yes.
Males who have not experienced abuse in the way that many women in South Africa and throughout the world have.
Yes.
So we do approach this question with the utmost humility, knowing that we don't have all the answers. And in hearing this, you might be able to shed a perspective that we may not be able to shed. So please do interact with us, and we'd love to hear from you as well. But what I would like to say is, as men, we need to think what God's design in terms of marriage firstly, but also God's intent for male's response to all women. We've been spending a chunk of time in Genesis, and up front we saw the importance of gender roles and the importance of men taking godly leadership positions where they cherish women, where they lead their wives in God glorifying directions. That the task given to men is to lead and is to cultivate an environment where their wives thrive. But we also saw that through the curse, there's been a distortion where instead of leading, men distort, men abuse, men objectify, men lord authority over women, where it should be a Christ-like leadership. So my first call would be for us as men in our marriages to exercise Christ-like leadership, even as Ephesians 5 calls us to love our wives even as Christ loved the church. That we would even lay our lives down for them, that we would cherish them and just lead them in a way that they become the best them that they can be. And that's our call. And we need to acknowledge that in our relationships, we never abuse our wives, never speak harshly to them, because, past physical abuse, emotional abuse is a huge thing too. And we just need to constantly be seeking Christ-like leadership, that we'd imitate Christ, that, our goal wouldn't be that we'd run away from what we see in the world, but rather that we would, as men, run to Christ and run to his example and run to how he leads. But what does that mean now for men who are not married, or how should men who are married treat other women? Well, the responsibility is for us to cherish them regardless of whether they are wives or our sisters or our friends or whatever the case may be. We all have spheres of influence where we can make a difference, where we can be part of the solution, where we can make a decision to, treat women with dignity as equal image bearers of God. And we need to do that wherever that may be. And, if we know of a situation where there's abuse, we need to encourage those women to go to the police station or to talk out against that, because sin always hides in its secrecy. The more secret it is, the more powerful it is. And the minute we expose that to the world, the lesser power it has. And we need to encourage those in our spheres of influence to do that. And, it is a big issue. Coming back to the question, it's a huge issue. Just what we're seeing on the news is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
Like, there's so many cases of abuse that go unreported in homes and, in our communities. There's so much of it. And men are caused to be part of the solution instead of saying, I'm not part of the problem. We should rather say, how can I be part of the solution?
Yeah. One of the issues that has been raised in different interviews in the news, on TV and in social media is that this problem of gender-based violence is because of a paternalistic type society that we live in and that the church perpetuates. However, the way I understand paternalistic is derived from paternal, meaning father. And a father, the model of fatherhood that we have in God is a loving, caring father. And fathers in our community need to follow the example of our loving father and be loving towards their wives and their children. And I think you touched on something there as well, Jono, that it's all of our responsibility as men in our community and in our church to call out bad behavior, not to shame men who are abusive, but to take them aside and correct them. There are really also two different types of people who are abused, mainly children and adults. So children in South Africa, if we discovered that they are being abused, we are obliged by law to report it. And that's a relatively easy matter. But for the majority of women who are in abusive relationships, we discover that they're very reluctant to want people to do anything about it. That they just share it to make people aware. But then when you ask, can I go speak to your husband or your boyfriend or whoever, then they'll usually say, no, please don't. Which makes it very, very difficult to address the problem because it stays secret. While the responsibility is never for the woman to do anything about it, it does help if they give permission to other men to help them. And that would make it very much easier for other men to raise an alarm and to address the issue. Jono, something else that I have come across is that people understand abuse just either as physical or sexual abuse, but we know that it's not quite limited to that. I was thinking of the World Health Organization's definition of abuse, where they have a number of categories. There's obviously sexual abuse and physical abuse, but other types of abuse include emotional abuse, which is probably the most damaging of all, even more so than physical abuse. And also neglect. People don't think of neglect as a type of abuse, but to neglect a person, especially somebody that you are supposed to love, can be very hurtful and damaging. And
and it's so subtle, eh? Like it starts with and neglect, and stems over into emotional abuse, and then from there it only grows. And
yes,
I think there our call would be to men: if you feel that you're struggling in this capacity, deal with it before it gets to a point where you're becoming aggressive with women. And as elders, we may not understand, or we may not know fully, but for you as men who are even struggling with this issue, we're here to walk with you and journey with you and help you through it. Because if we are willing to identify problems in our own lives much sooner, we are more likely to be able to deal with it and not let it get to a point where it becomes things like abuse proper and that type of thing. So speak out. Come to us.
Yes. Jono, one of the myths that probably still survives in our society is that it'll never happen in my family, or it'll never happen in my church or my community, or there's no such thing going on in our church. How do you feel about that?
I think we like to use it as a blanket statement to avoid the realities. And the problem with the thing like abuse is because it's so subtle and it's such a hidden thing that may be going on in our own families, our own church, our own community, our own neighborhoods without us even knowing about it. So the more we say it will never happen, the more we'll turn a blind eye to it, because we won't see the subtle hints of abuse. So instead of us saying it will never happen to us or never happen near us, let's rather say, or let's rather open our eyes and look to see where it is happening and to see how we can be a solution. And if we're blessed enough for it not to be happening in our families or our communities, let's cultivate a culture to ensure that it never happens. Instead of saying it will never happen, let's make sure it will never happen by leading our families in God glorifying directions, disseminating the gospel in our neighborhoods. And in all of this, Jesus Christ is the only answer for the abused, but also for the abuser. Only Jesus Christ can take an aggressive heart and turn that into a heart of flesh and a compassionate heart. So
Jono, one of the aspects of abuse that always comes across is that it is the vulnerable that are taken advantage of. So people in a weaker position. So an abuser normally has a position of authority, or they are physically stronger or older, and yet they prey on people who are weaker. And a saying that I came across a number of years ago is that hurting people hurt others. And this is something that the Jesus actually came to fix by healing the hurting, to break that cycle of hurting people, hurting others. Yeah. A while ago, I heard an interview on TV, on the BBC channel, of an interview with a guy working in America with communities that are rife with violence. And something that he said that stuck with me is that violence is like a disease and should be approached like a disease. Sometimes those who are violent are so violent that they need to be quarantined from other people and from society. However, that's not always the case, and that there is healing that can occur.
Yeah.
But also we need to protect those around them from becoming infected with violence.
Yeah.
And he said that in his work in violent communities, they actually send in health workers to deal with the issue from a health worker perspective, which just shows you how much of a disease it is in some communities.
Yeah, it's multifaceted in many ways, because it's a spiritual issue, but it's also sometimes a physical and emotional issue as well, from just from the perspective of the abuser, and it's hugely complex. And you know, ultimately, as much as we can provide a biblical answer of what men should do and how to resolve abuse, we admit that we don't have all the answers, and it's immensely difficult and complex in dealing with an issue like this. So we call for prayer during this time, and prayer for men and prayer for women, and to use our spheres of influence for God's glory and to help the oppressed. God calls us to help the oppressed, to help those that are abused, those that are taken advantage of. So we have a parameter to exercise that, whether that be, like Craig said, reporting it so that that person is quarantined. By that we mean going to prison, or whether it's an issue that can still be dealt with in addressing that person directly. That we need to do something, and we need to be part of the solution.
Yes, yeah. So, Jono, if we just summarize that, then we are asking people, especially with children, to report any abuse that they are aware of. And abusers are normally people well known to the abused. So within the family and within the community. And often people are reluctant to report it because it's people close to them. But the law is clear, especially with children, that we need to report those issues.
Yeah. And I think even in cases of domestic violence, to women particularly as well. Sorry, I just got something in my throat. Because we often hear like neighbors fighting and that type of thing, and we tend to take this perspective: oh, it's not my business. I don't really want to interact with this, so let me leave it alone. But if we hear a neighbor being beaten up, I think we should even then phone the police and report it. But the difficulty is where we know the women personally, and they ask us not to speak to their husbands. It's very difficult. But our call to those women is to expose the sin so that it can be dealt with.
Thank you, Jono. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Craig.
It's a very difficult subject, and I imagine a subject that we need to continue talking about and not let lie down.
Yeah, absolutely. In church, again, we just say with humility that we don't have the answers. But please interact with us. Maybe you have a perspective that we haven't shed light on. Maybe you've experienced abuse and have journeyed through it, and maybe you can help others who have experienced that. And we just want to say, as a church community, the responsibility is on all of us to come together and deal with this. So please interact with us, please help us, and let's journey together through this.
Yes, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. Thank you, Jono.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, church. Enjoy the service.
Amen. Take care.